He fired me in front of the whole damn floor, right after the morning whistle, like he was announcing a halftime score. This plant doesn't need dead weight, Derek Langston Jr. smirked, holding his iPad like it was a gavel. We're done here. And just like that, 23 years of keeping payroll flowing, sick leave balances honest, and grievances from boiling over, gone. He didn't even look me in the eye, just turned back to his little entourage of MBA interns and digital consultants like I was a stray piece of metal on the production line. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't throw a damn thing. I reached into my coat, pulled out a plain white envelope, and handed it to him. No words. No explanation. Just a sealed envelope that might as well have been a live grenade. He glanced at it like it was a customer complaint, chuckled under his breath, and tucked it under his arm without another thought. If you're listening right now and you've ever been kicked while still holding the damn tool that kept the whole machine running, you'll get why I didn't fight back. Not right there, because I didn't need to. Quick thing, 97% of folks who hear these stories never hit subscribe. If this story hits a nerve, if it reminds you of someone who thought paper pushers don't carry hammers too, hit that like button and subscribe. It means the world to the team that brings you stories like this one. Back to the floor. The silence after he fired me felt heavier than the sound of the machine stopping. Nobody spoke. Not the line leads, not the supervisors. Not even Jerome, who usually cracks a joke when someone forgets their badge. They just stared as I walked down the yellow safety lines for the last time, boots clicking like a metronome in a song no one dared to hum. Out in the parking lot, I could still hear his voice echoing from the loudspeaker, rambling about efficiency targets and modernizing mindsets. I sat in my truck for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine, watching the smokestacks puff behind his Welcome New Era banner. He thought he'd made a statement. He thought cutting me loose was going to show everyone who was boss. But Derek Jr. didn't know his father's playbook. Hell, I wrote half of it. And buried deep inside those dusty old protocols, under Schedule C, Appendix 4, and a page marked Contingency, was my name. Not as an employee, not even as a union rep, but as a designated verifier. The one person who could, under breach of trust conditions, authenticate a labor action without need for further executive approval. Derek Sr. called it a nuclear clause. Most folks forgot it even existed, except me. And that envelope, that was my finger on the button. It started during the 2011 standoff, when management tried to squeeze a third shift onto second shift's lunch hour and docked overtime down to the minute. Tensions were about to boil over. The union nearly walked, and the only reason we didn't lose the whole plant that winter was because I wrote a document nobody asked for. I called it the Contingency Labor Action Protocol. Part policy, part insurance policy, part middle finger in Times New Roman. I buried it inside a compliance binder labeled Legacy Liaison Frameworks, right where nobody ambitious enough to kill old systems would ever look. The language was tight, sterile, impossible to misinterpret. It didn't call for a strike, didn't promise one either. It just outlined, quietly, legally, how one could be authorized and who had the right to activate it in the absence of leadership or under breach of trust conditions. I wasn't posturing. I wasn't grandstanding. I just knew the kind of fire that needed a glass box. The old CEO, Derek Sr., he read every page. Didn't say much, but he added one signature at the bottom and scratched his initials next to mine. Designated verifier. Active if Protocol C is breached or morale collapse is imminent. He didn't like the wording, but he liked having a lever no one else knew about. Fast forward to Derek Jr., strutting in fresh from a failed electric scooter startup, armed with buzzwords and a god complex. He was onboarding at light speed, trying to sign off on every dusty procedure like he was flipping switches on a space shuttle. Legal handed him 30-plus legacy appendices, half obsolete, half critical, none reviewed. He didn't read a word, just skimmed for dotted lines and signed them like autographs at a frat reunion. That's how his name ended up on Schedule C, right under mine. He initialed next to my clause about contingent strike verification, probably thinking it was another recycling policy or a PPE compliance measure. He didn't even notice the timestamp section, digitally embedded, legally bound, cross-referenced against the union's legacy contracts and the National Labor Peace Framework. All I had to do was wait. 3 weeks later, he fired me. The very act itself fulfilled the unilateral breach trigger. That envelope I handed him, it wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was execution. He thought he'd tossed a relic out of the building. What he actually did was walk a lit match into a fireworks factory, then lock the door behind him. And me? I sat at home that night with a glass of iced bourbon, reading the union steward group chats lighting up like Christmas, screenshots of old contract clauses, PDFs they hadn't opened in years, messages like, "Did y'all see this signature?" and "Is this still valid?" And finally, one from Maria on the late shift sent directly to me, "Is it real?" I wrote back, "If he signed it, it's live." No smile, no satisfaction, just truth. Because I didn't need to yell to be heard. All I ever needed was ink, silence, and someone arrogant enough to skip the fine print. By sundown, the quiet rage had a rhythm, not yelling, not panic, just a low, deliberate hum like pressure building inside steel. Words spread faster than oil in the break room. Screenshots, whispers, half-remembered contract clauses pulled from dusty drawers. My name was already in the union threads before I even finished dinner. Not because I made noise, because the quiet ones always leave the deepest crater. You have to understand, we'd been teetering for years. The old-timers held the line because they remembered what it used to feel like when management looked you in the eye. But the new crew, they'd had enough of being told to pivot, adapt, and upskill while their hours got sliced and their benefits bled out in silent quarterly memos. All it took was one arrogant kid with a laminated vision board and a mic, and one envelope. By 8:42 p.m., someone had uploaded a blurry PDF of Schedule C. By 9:10, it was annotated. By 9:38, someone had pulled the time-stamped server logs showing Derek Jr.'s digital signature. At 10:17, my phone buzzed. Union Steward, Tony Garza. Been there 15 years. Sharp. Controlled. Never escalated unless escalation was already behind schedule. He texted, "Is this real?" I stared at the screen for a beat. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what would happen if I said it. I wrote, "If he signed it, it's live." No emojis, no caveats. I knew Tony. He wouldn't run to Facebook with it. He'd do what I hoped he would. Verify, cross-check, build consensus. Because the union wasn't just angry, they were organized. And this wasn't a protest. It was a clause that made every hothead in management accountable to paper they didn't even know existed. By midnight, 4 floor reps had reshared the doc, adding their own quiet commentary. "This is legal. This is the old strike net. She's the verifier. Signed. Active." I didn't post, didn't comment, just watched. I poured another drink and stared out at the darkened tree line behind my house, listening to the sound of a train somewhere far off, thundering down the track like it had a deadline to keep. At 12:47 a.m., a younger shift tech, Jalen, barely 24, sent me a message. He wrote, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I stared at it for a second before replying, "Because smart leadership would have never made me need to." He reacted with a thumbs up. The digital equivalent of nodding through clenched teeth. Underneath it all, beneath the threads, the archived contracts, the mounting screenshots, wasn't just fury. It was loyalty. Not to me, necessarily, but to the idea that someone had, quietly, prepared for exactly this day, that someone had thought ahead, that when the bottom dropped out, the floor wouldn't fall with it. Derek Jr. thought he could fire the glue and keep the machine running. What he didn't understand was, I wasn't glue. I was the pin in the grenade. The morning horn blew at 6 a.m., same as always. But there was no movement, just a stillness that settled like ash. No boots on the catwalks, no hydraulics warming up, no forklift beeps or tool bins rattling along the concrete. Just silence. A heavy, breath-holding kind of silence, like the air itself was bracing for what came next. First, it was Bay 3, final assembly, then paint, then logistics. By 6:13, over 3,000 workers had walked. Some didn't clock in at all. Others arrived, stood at their stations, then folded their arms and waited. Not angry, not loud, just still, like soldiers who'd read their orders and decided not to salute. Derek Jr. stormed onto the floor 20 minutes later, still wearing his LinkedIn smile and golf course cologne, barking into a headset like this was a delivery mishap, not a labor freeze. "This is an intimidation stunt," he shouted to no one in particular. "We'll start pulling from the temp pool by noon." Noon came. no temps. Because no temp agency was going to send workers into an active, clause-backed strike without insurance and legal clearance. And those insurance providers? They were already on hold with corporate legal, wondering why their underwriter portals were being flooded with sudden high-risk alerts tied to one single plant ID. By 12:45 p.m., the floor was frozen. Supply trucks idled at the perimeter, confused drivers calling dispatch with, "I think something's up" tones. The internal system showed inventory stuck mid-process, half-finished chassis lining the conveyors like monuments to abandoned ambition. Management walked the floor in loose packs, trying to look busy while doing absolutely nothing useful. You could tell the ones who knew how bad this really was by the way they kept checking their watches, like time might throw them a rope. At 1:08, the union reps arrived. Not to negotiate, not even to protest. They didn't carry signs or bullhorns. They carried clipboards. They took notes, measured head counts, quietly asked who was still clocking time and why, and they all had the same laminated copy of the clause Derek had signed. They made no demands. They quoted no slogans, just stood there, silently present, like compliance ghosts reminding the executives that this wasn't some spontaneous walkout. This was pre-approved, sanctioned, activated. I heard later Derek tried to gather the department heads for a realignment summit in Conference B, but nobody showed. One manager apparently told him, "I'm not violating a signed provision just because your ego's got wet hair." At 3:27, he tried to push a message through internal channels, claiming this was unauthorized activity subject to discipline. That was the moment the union's legal team replied, publicly and with timestamps. "We recognize this strike as a lawful response to breach of governance as defined in Protocol C, Clause 5B, activated by CEO signature on date, hide, time. Any attempts to suppress this action may constitute retaliation under federal labor law." And just like that, the conversation ended. The plant didn't need noise to break. It broke in silence. Clean, surgical, and irreversible. Derek Jr. thought the first silence was obedience, but it was warning. By sunrise the next day, the executive suite at headquarters was lit up like an air traffic tower in a thunderstorm. I wasn't in the room, but I knew the pattern by heart. Escalation flowcharts, emergency dial-ins, jargon flying like debris in a hurricane. To them, this was a disruption, a labor event. Something that could be fixed with a statement and a spreadsheet. They were wrong. The strike wasn't just hurting production. It was melting the whole damn supply chain. Our plant fed assembly to 5 other facilities, 3 of them in active just-in-time sync. Without us, their lines sputtered and seized like engines full of gravel. By 9:15 a.m., incoming trucks were rerouted, then canceled. At 10:02, I got a call from a friend over at one of our Tier 1 parts vendors. Her voice was tight, breathless. "We just had 84,000 units put on hold. They said it's tied to Bridgemore going dark. What the hell is happening over there?" I told her, "They woke up the wrong clause." Derek, for his part, was still laughing it off like he was dealing with a scheduling hiccup. Told HQ it was a manufactured crisis from outdated radicals. Claimed I'd planted something, called the entire strike theatrical. He strutted through a live-streamed damage control session from the break room, talking about culture misalignment and generational gaps in accountability. He actually used the phrase vocal minorities to describe 11,000 workers. But then the phone started ringing. Not just internal, external, loud. By mid-morning, legal counsel at HQ flagged something they hadn't seen before. It came from a low-priority file marked Legacy Liaisons Conditional Frameworks. Inside, it was a single document, 8 pages long, tucked under a dusty compliance header. It was Schedule C. They opened it, read it twice. Then they cross-referenced the digital audit logs. And that's when the real panic began. Because there it was, black and white, time-stamped, compliant, digitally verified. Derek Langston Jr., Chief Executive Officer, had signed the document 3 weeks ago under Authority Clause pass-through during onboarding. His name, his ID, his approval. Right beneath a header in bold, contingent upon breach of trust, full strike rights resume under signed authorization by designated verifier and standing CEO. They called in a compliance lawyer. She double-checked the chain of custody, the revision history, the clause triggers. She said 3 words. It's airtight. Word spread like spilled paint through HQ. The CFO asked, "Who the hell is the verifier?" One of the senior HR analysts replied, "Her name's on the board under legacy governance, been there since 2012. That's when Derek started pacing, not because he didn't understand what had happened, but because he finally did. The clause hadn't needed negotiation. It didn't require approval. It was already active. The act of firing me had satisfied the breach condition. His signature, his reckless, unread scribble, had been the match to a document built like dry timber. And now, metal wasn't moving. Numbers weren't producing product, and his empire of digital dashboards and motivational emails couldn't fix it. They could crunch all the KPIs they wanted, but no graph was going to restart the line. Because workers don't bend to formulas, and steel doesn't roll without hands. And Derek Jr., for all his talk of culture disruption and agile efficiencies, forgot the one rule every factory veteran knows deep in their spine: numbers don't move metal. People do. My phone rang at 2:11 p.m. that Thursday. Not a number I recognized, but the area code told me it was coming straight from Bridgemore HQ, corporate tower, 19th floor, where people wear suit vests in July and use words like optics, unironically. I let it buzz twice before I answered. "This is Karen," I said, like I wasn't already 3 steps ahead. A man cleared his throat on the other end, crisp voice, trained but tight. "Ms. Carter, this is Malcolm Dwyer, General Counsel for Langston Industrial Holdings. I'd like to ask you a few questions regarding a document you may be familiar with." "Schedule C?" He said it like he was holding a snake. "I'm familiar." Pause. "We've become aware of a signed provision activating a conditional strike authorization. The signature on file appears to be that of Mr. Derek Langston Jr. Is that accurate?" "It is." "You're listed as verifier?" "I am." "And you can confirm his digital signature and the chain of custody for this clause?" I pulled up the log on my laptop, clicked twice, opened the certification file, then the mirrored backup I kept in cold storage, because I knew this day would come, and I wasn't about to depend on someone else's version of events. Timestamped. ISO verified, chain intact, screenshots archived, digital ledger back to 2 independent systems. He exhaled slowly. It wasn't relief. It was recognition, like hearing the judge read the verdict and realizing the handcuffs were already halfway closed. "Why, was your name on it?" he finally asked. "You're not current management. You were payroll liaison, correct?" I smiled, but only to myself. That document was created during the 2011 near walkout. At the time, Mr. Langston Sr. asked for a neutral verifier, someone trusted by both the floor and the board, with access to grievance metrics and morale indicators, someone who could call breach if things ever got that far. I was that person. And it was never deactivated? Not by me, not by legal, not by governance. Another pause. The kind of silence people use when they realize they just drove into a lake wearing blinders and no seatbelt. Why wasn't it flagged during Derek Jr.'s onboarding? Because he didn't read. He signed appendices to look fast and competent. That's not my fault. I heard papers rustling, the sound of too many lawyers trying to make one line disappear. "And you triggered the clause by handing him a document after your termination?" "No," I said calmly. "He triggered it the moment he terminated me without cause under breach conditions. The clause is passive. It activates upon violation, not upon reaction. My envelope was a courtesy. His signature was the bullet." For a while, Dwyer said nothing. I imagined him removing his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose, wondering if early retirement was still on the table. "Karen, what's your desired outcome here?" There it was, the offer to play ball, to soften, to negotiate like this was just another speed bump. But I wasn't here to bargain. I wasn't mad. I wasn't emotional. I was prepared. "My outcome?" I said. "That's not up to me. The clause is doing what it was written to do. If you want to fix this, you'll need more than lawyers. You'll need credibility. Because when paper speaks with truth, and people know the name on the line stands for something, they listen. And right now, the whole damn plant was listening. They didn't even know he was coming." 1 minute, Derek Jr. was pacing the break room with his 3rd cold brew of the morning, snapping at admins and muttering about legal overreach. The next, a black town car rolled past the loading dock like a damn funeral procession. Derek Langston Sr., the man who built Bridgemore Auto from steel and spit, stepped out in a navy suit so sharp the heat shimmered off it. No entourage, no PR team, just him and the weight of a legacy that didn't tolerate fools. He didn't stop to shake hands, didn't ask for a tour. He walked straight through the plant like he still knew every turn, every rattle, every whistle. And maybe he did. By the time he hit the elevators, word had already spread across every department like a tornado warning. Phones went silent. Nobody wanted to be the first one he looked at. By 10:03 a.m., an emergency boardroom session was called. Invite only. Everyone with real decision power, plus one silent black tile blinking on the video call screen. Me. Karen Carter, legacy liaison, remote attendance. I didn't bother with my camera. Just audio, just voice. They knew who I was. Derek Jr. started talking before his father even sat down. There's been a massive overreaction, Dad. This isn't a strike. It's a coordinated misinformation campaign exploiting outdated governance, a sabotage attempt using legacy loopholes. His words were manic, buzzwords stacked on jargon, fingers waving toward nothing. He looked like a man selling ice in a snowstorm. His father didn't speak, just opened his briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, the very envelope I had handed Derek Jr. on the floor, and slid it across the polished table. I believe this is your signature, he said, voice like cold iron. And that, he added, turning the paper, is hers, on the clause you were too arrogant to read. Derek Jr. tried to interrupt. Something about digital signatures being procedural and not consent-based in this context. Langston Sr. raised a single hand. The room froze. Stop. Silence. Let me be very clear. That woman, he pointed at the speaker icon pulsing on the screen, has more operational wisdom in her left hand than you've shown in your entire tenure. She drafted the very protocols that kept this plant from walking out in 2011. She built bridges while you were building Instagram reels. He turned his eyes to the legal team. Is the clause valid? Yes, sir. And her signature? Verified. Time-stamped. Legally binding. Then why are we still pretending this is a PR issue? Derek Jr. looked like he'd swallowed a staple. Finally, someone asked if I had anything to say. I clicked my mic on. My voice came through clear. Not smug, not bitter, just steady. I didn't build that clause to cause chaos. I built it to make sure, if trust ever collapsed, we didn't lose everything. Derek Jr. fired the one person holding the line, and he signed the paper that let the line walk. No one responded. They didn't need to, because the damage was done. And so was the pretending. Langston Sr. leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said the last thing anyone expected. Get her back, however she wants, and get my son out of operations before he kills this company. The call ended. I sat back in my chair, heart steady, pulse even. Not because I won, but because truth finally echoed louder than arrogance. The offer came the next morning, not through HR, not through some bland recruiter or automated form email. It came straight from Langston Sr.'s office, delivered by a real human being, Susan Tang, the only VP left who knew how to walk a factory floor without looking lost. She didn't call. She drove to my house. I opened the door and there she was, in flats instead of heels. No clipboard, no pre-written script. Just a single folder in her hand and a face that looked like it hadn't slept since the town car rolled in. He wants to make this right, she said. I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He's got a lot to undo, she nodded. That's why he's not sending lawyers. Inside that folder was a formal offer. Independent consultant. Labor integrity and compliance, non-executive, non-subordinate, direct line to board oversight. I'd advise. They'd listen. They had no choice now. But I wasn't interested in title. I was interested in terms. So I laid them out, flat and clean. First, full restoration of union trust. Not in theory, not in memos. I wanted a public acknowledgement that the clause had been valid, that the strike was lawful, and that the breach came from within, not from labor, but from leadership. Second, immunity. Blanket non-retaliation protections for every worker who participated in or supported the walkout, from shift leads to janitorial staff. Third, audit. Not just of Derek Jr.'s decisions, but of the whole compliance ecosystem, every broken link, every ignored policy, every culture-killing shortcut dressed up as disruption. And finally, I wanted it in writing. No handshakes, no gentlemen's agreements. I'd seen too many of those fold under pressure. Susan didn't blink, just nodded, scribbled my points onto a yellow legal pad, and said, "You'll have it by end of day." By noon, the board had stripped Derek Jr. of all operational duties pending internal review. They worded it carefully, like he was being sent to study his mistakes from a safe distance. Translation: he was out. The strike ended at 3:47 p.m., no parades, no cheers, just a single union bulletin that said, "Resolved through internal governance correction, terms accepted, operations resume." I didn't return to the floor. That wasn't the point. I met with the new interim operations lead, a woman named Dolores Marks, 27 years in the logistics division, never once gunning for headlines. She shook my hand, said, "We'll listen better this time." I believed her. Later that evening, I sat in the boardroom, not at the end of the table, not in the spotlight, just to the side, with a binder in my lap and a pen in my hand. They asked questions. I answered. I corrected their language when they talked about team morale like it was a line item on a chart. I didn't raise my voice, didn't wave a flag, didn't gloat, because this wasn't a victory lap. This was cleanup after a fire. And I wasn't here for applause. I was here to rebuild the fire alarms. 1 month later, the clanging rhythm of Bridgemore Auto returned, but sharper this time, like someone had cleaned the grit out of the gears. There was no grand reopening, no balloons, just a quiet hum across the bays, the kind of harmony you only get when people finally believe they're being heard. Dolores Marks took the CEO seat officially last Tuesday. No fuss, no PR stunt, just a direct message from the board, approved unanimously. She didn't need a consultant army to win the floor's respect. She already had it. She knew every weld team by name, every clock-in terminal glitch, every corner where morale used to bleed out by the gallon. When she walked through the plant now, people didn't stiffen up. They nodded. The difference was subtle, but it was tectonic. Derek Jr., meanwhile, disappeared faster than a bonus check under old management. Officially, he was reassigned to Strategic Initiatives Development, somewhere in corporate's brand innovation wing. I heard his new office was 2 floors below the executive suite. No windows. Rumor is he's pitching AI-enhanced employee satisfaction dashboards. Fitting, for a man who once thought loyalty could be graft. They kept his photo on the internal website, but nobody clicks it anymore. The quarterly report dropped on a quiet Friday. I didn't plan to read it, but one of the shift leads texted me a screenshot. There it was, on page 7, under Key Contributors to Governance Stabilization. Karen Carter, Independent Labor Integrity Consultant, no fanfare, no headshot. Just ink on a line that used to belong to people who smiled for cameras and never remembered your birthday. And I liked it that way. I still work remotely. Still keep my old boots by the back door, even if they don't see much concrete these days. But when they send over contracts or propose changes to policy language, they always include one line at the top now. Review requested, final word, Carter. I don't need power. I just need precision. Sometimes people ask me if I was ever scared, if I worried about getting blackballed, about taking on someone with that kind of name and backing. I tell them no, because it was never about him. It was about the paper, and the truth buried inside it. Turns out, the union didn't scare me either. But the paperwork, it should have scared him.